Well, today as we continue our journey through the Bible, we begin the book of Ezra, and I want to give you a little background on it before I read the verse of the day. Ezra in ancient times actually included the book of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Hebrew Bible. They were part of a single book, and it's written to tell how some of those people who were carried off in captivity to Babylon were able to return from captivity and how they worked at restoring their religion and their religious community, how they sought to restore the temple and to refortify and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so during the exile, when their religious faith could no longer center around sacrifices and worship at the temple, the Jewish people had to readjust. And what was going to be the center of their faith if it couldn't be the sacrificial worship at the temple? And that focus became the law of Moses that had been rediscovered under King Josiah at the end of 2 Chronicles. And so when they returned, they weren't just concerned with reconstructing the altar, the temple, and the city, but they also had social and religious problems to cope with, opposition to their rebuilding the city and the temple in Jerusalem, how they reestablished their religious practices in a stricter conformity, if you would, to their understanding of the law of Moses. And this led to some heartrending, really, choices and decisions that I'll share at the very end of the book of Ezra. And so there seem to have been about 4 stages to the return, and the first is under Cyrus, which started around 538 BC, and that was led by Sheshbazzar, who commenced the rebuilding of the temple, but under local opposition had to leave it unfinished. And that's where the book of Ezra begins. It's under the reign of King Cyrus of Persia, and we're told that the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, which is really a fascinating statement. You know, sometimes we as Christians can be inappropriately arrogant in thinking that God only works through, God's people or people who theologically we agree with. Well, the Bible tells us in many, many stories how God uses all kinds of people, whether they're part of God's faithful remnant or not. So God's Spirit stirs the King Cyrus of Persia, and he gives the Jews permission to return. And our verse of the day is Ezra chapter 1, verse 3, which says, "Any of those among you who are of his people, may their God be with them, are now permitted to go up to Jerusalem and Judah and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem." Can you imagine how you would have felt if you were one of the Jews who heard that news? You could go home, you could rebuild, you could start your life over again. What a joyous day that must have been.